What happens when a profound artistic vision, born from the deepest spiritual yearning, possesses the sheer, terrifying audacity to turn out the lights on 5,000 years of human culture, not out of malice or nihilism, but out of a desperate, messianic need to see what glows in the absolute dark? That is the question that should rattle your bones when you approach the work of Kazimir Malevich. We are not speaking here of a painter who wanted to simply change the style of art, like a man changing his coat for a new season. We are speaking of a man who wanted to change the very structure of human consciousness, to rewire our way of seeing and thinking about reality itself. To understand Malevich is to understand the difference between a mere renovation and a total demolition, followed by an entirely new genesis. He did not want to fix the existing house of art. He wanted to burn it to the ground and float its ashes in the vacuum of pure space. He is the great assassin of the object, the man who looked at a mountain, a cow, and a czar, and saw them not as inherent realities, but as deceptive illusions, as unnecessary obstacles to the profound spiritual truth he was seeking. In the early 20th century, while much of the Western world was still busy painting polite fruit bowls in rainy Parisian streets, Malevich was engaged in an unprecedented act of creation, inventing a new visual religion where the only God was pure, unadulterated sensation. To grasp the magnitude of his messianic vision, one must first purge one's mind of the modern habit of scrolling past images with a fleeting glance. One must transport oneself to the frozen, volatile atmosphere of Russia in the years leading up to the Revolution of 1917. It was a time of profound societal and spiritual apocalypse. The old world was rotting from the inside out. The Tsar was weak, the church was corrupt, and the vast peasant population was starving, not just for bread, but for a new reality, a new meaning, a new vision of the future. Into this spiritual vacuum stepped Malevich, a man with the eyes of a prophet, the intellect of a philosopher, and the stubbornness of a peasant. He realized that the art of the past, the art of imitation, of copying nature, of representing the world as it appeared to the eye, was a profound lie. Why paint a rose when the rose dies? Why paint a face when the flesh inevitably rots? He sought something eternal. He sought what he called the zero of form. The concept of zero is the absolute fulcrum upon which his entire philosophy and artistic practice turn. Most people, conditioned by material existence, fear zero. They fear the void, the nothingness, the absence. Malevich embraced it with the fervor of a religious convert. He declared famously that he had transformed himself in the zero of form and emerged on the other side. This was not a nihilistic negation of life or art. It was, for him, a radical purification. Imagine a dirty, cluttered window through which you have always viewed the world. For centuries, artists had been diligently painting more pictures on that very glass, pictures of landscapes, of kings, of battles, accumulating layers of representation. Malevich, with a powerful gesture, took a rag and wiped the glass clean. That clean, transparent glass is the zero. It is the beginning of everything. It is the primordial, unblemished space where the mind can finally fly, truly free, without bumping into the heavy, cumbersome furniture of the material world. It is the pure field of human consciousness itself. His visual language, which he christened Suprematism, is deceptively simple, almost infantile in its elemental purity. It is the language of the square, the circle, and the cross. But do not be fooled by the geometry. This is not math class, nor is it merely abstract design. This is mysticism encoded in shapes, a new alphabet for spiritual truth. The square, for Malevich, was not a scientific shape. It was the face of a new god. It was the first form, the primal building block. He referred to it as the royal infant of a new purified civilization. Unlike the irregular, imperfect shapes found in nature, the jagged leaf, the meandering river, the asymmetrical rock, the perfect square is a pure invention of the human spirit. Nature does not spontaneously produce perfect squares. Only the human mind, through abstraction and idealization, does. Therefore, the square, for Malevich, was the ultimate triumph of the human will over the chaos and accident of nature. It was the supreme dominance of consciousness over brute matter. When you look at his suprematist compositions, you are looking at forces and energies, not at traditional objects. In traditional art, the laws of gravity rule supreme. The apple sits heavily on the table stands firmly on the floor. In a Malevich painting, gravity is triumphantly abolished. The forms float. They drift and spin in a vast white abyss that represents the infinite cosmos. The red squares, the black rectangles, the blue beams. They are not sitting statically. They are flying. They are like satellites orbiting a planet that has not yet been discovered, or perhaps orbiting the viewer's own liberated consciousness. This profound obsession with flight and cosmic space was remarkably prophetic, decades before humanity actually launched rockets into the stratosphere and viewed the Earth from orbit. Malevich was painting the sensation of aerial views, the feeling of weightlessness. He was designing the aesthetics of the space age before the technology itself even existed. He aimed to evoke a pure, non-objective experience of cosmic freedom. Let us talk about the black square, not as a specific painting, but as a psychic, historical, and philosophical event. While the concept was gestating as early as 1913 in his set designs for the futurist opera Victory Over the Sun, where the square replaced the solar disk, it was in 1915 that he fully realized it as a standalone painting. When he first exhibited this iconic work at the Zero Temp exhibition in Petrograd, he did something incredibly provocative, an act of intentional blasphemy in the eyes of many. He hung it high in the corner of the room, across two walls where the ceiling and walls meet. In a traditional Russian Orthodox home, this red corner, the Krasny Ugol, is the most sacred spot, reserved for the icon of the saint or Christ. By placing a stark black square in that holy position, Malevich was making a radical theological declaration. He was saying, the old saints are dead, the old narratives are dead, the old representational art, tethered to the physical world, is dead. Here is your new icon. Here is your new God, pure sensation, pure form. It was an act of iconoclasm that terrified and outraged much of the public. People wept. They thought art had ended, had been obliterated. But for Malevich, it was the only way to clear the path for the future. The black was not emptiness. It was the fullness of pure, concentrated feeling. The white border, or the white background, was the void of the universe, allowing that profound feeling to manifest, giving it boundless space. The color in Malevich's universe is not decorative. It is utilitarian in a deeply spiritual sense. He codified color like a meticulous chemist, assigning each hue a specific meaning and function. Black was the sign of economy, of the absolute 0 point, the primal state. Red was the signal of the revolution, the spark of life, of agitation, of raw energy. White was the prism, the infinite space where all colors merge and disappear, the ultimate freedom. He utterly rejected the nuanced blending and atmospheric effects of the Impressionists and the sentimental palettes of previous eras. He didn't want the fleeting light of a sunny afternoon. He wanted the eternal, unwavering light of the mind. His colors are flat, unmodulated, and uncompromising. They hit the eye with the force of a physical blow, a direct sensory experience. They are meant to wake you up, to jar you out of your complacency, to sever your ties with the illusory comfort of the familiar. However, we must correct a common misconception about the flatness of his work. If you see these paintings reproduced in a book or on a digital screen, they often look like sterile graphic design. They look like perfect machine-made prints. But in person, they are profoundly physical, possessing a rich tactile dimension. This is where the concept of factura comes in, the Russian word referring to the texture, the surface quality, or the making of the surface. Malevich's squares are not perfect, industrially produced objects. They are craggy. The paint is often cracked, sometimes intentionally. You can see the visible brushstrokes fighting each other, asserting the human hand. Over time, the chemical instability of some of his pigments has caused the black to crackle, revealing hints of earlier colors underneath. Because often he painted the black square over a complex representational composition, literally burying the old world under the new. This physicality, this evidence of struggle, is essential. It reminds us that this sublime spiritual vision was wrestled into existence by a human hand, not by a sterile machine. It is a fragile absolute, an imperfect perfection. The evolution of his style tells the story of a mind relentlessly shedding weight, like a rocket shedding its stages on the way to orbit. He started like many painting impressionist landscapes, then moved into a heavy, brutal style called Cubo-Futurism, where Russian peasants were depicted as metallic, almost robotic figures made of cylinders and cones. This was his attempt to reconcile the earthy soil of Russia with the accelerating machine age. But it wasn't enough. He realized that as long as there was a recognizable subject, a peasant, a bucket, a field, the art was still tethered to the earth, still bound by gravity. He had to cut the rope. When he finally arrived at pure suprematism in 1915, it was a moment of ecstatic, almost violent release. The forms exploded. In compositions featuring multiple elements, you see a riot of colored shapes tumbling, colliding, and rotating through the white ether. It is a visual representation of energy released from matter, a painterly diagram of atomic forces. It is what Einstein's equation EmC2 might look like rendered in paint. Then came the white-on-white phase in 1918. This was the logical, ultimate conclusion of his suprematist journey. If the black square was the absolute beginning, the white square on a white background was the dissolution into the infinite. In the midst of the chaos and civil war of the Bolshevik Revolution, Malevich painted white forms barely distinguishable from the white background. The boundaries blur. The sensation is one of fading into pure light, of merging with the boundless. It is the visual equivalent of ultimate silence, of nirvana. It is the moment when the mystic merges completely with the divine light and ceases to exist as a separate entity. He had, in effect, painted himself out of the picture. He had reached the perceived end of art, exhausting its material possibilities. But the tragedy of Malevich is that he lived too long, relative to his own artistic revolution. He lived to see his avant-garde vision betrayed. The Bolsheviks, who initially embraced the avant-garde as the art of the future, eventually turned against it. Stalin's regime demanded art that the masses could easily understand, and that served the state's propaganda, socialist realism. They wanted paintings of happy tractor drivers and heroic factory workers. Malevich's spiritual geometry was declared bourgeois, elitist, and counter-revolutionary. The state crushed him. He was arrested, interrogated, and banned from exhibiting his abstract works. This is where the story becomes heartbreakingly human, revealing the immense fortitude of his spirit. Forced to return to figurative painting to survive and avoid further persecution in the late 1920s and 30s, Malevich began painting peasants again. But these were not the metallic robots of his youth, nor the happy workers of Stalinist propaganda. These peasants were strangely faceless. They were anonymous mannequins standing in empty, desolate landscapes. Their heads were blank ovals of red, black, or white, devoid of individual identity. They were ghosts. It was a silent scream against the dehumanization and forced collectivization of the Soviet state. And in the corner of these paintings, where an artist usually signs his name, Malevich would often paint a tiny black square. It was a secret code. It was a defiant whisper saying, "You can force me to paint people, but you cannot kill the square. The spirit is still here, hiding in plain sight, a beacon of my true artistic conviction. Why does this matter to you? Living in a world of high-definition distraction, infinite content, and constant noise." It matters because Malevich identified the fundamental problem of the modern age before it even fully began: the clutter of the object. We are addicted to things. We define ourselves by what we own, what we see, what we consume. We are drowning in information and material possessions. Malevich offered an antidote. He offered a way to see the world not as a collection of commodities, but as a field of pure, energetic forces. He teaches us that if we strip away the noise, the branding, and the clutter, we are left with pure feeling, a profound human experience. His art is a demand for focus. It is aggressive in its silence. When you stand before a suprematist composition, you cannot read it like a story. There is no narrative to follow. There is no moral lesson to extract. There is only the tension between the shapes and the infinite space. It forces you to look inward. It acts as a mirror for your own capacity to feel, to perceive, to connect. If you are empty of feeling, the painting remains empty. If you are willing to engage, to open your mind, the painting vibrates with life. It relies on the viewer to complete the circuit of meaning. This is a messianic stance because it places the responsibility of spiritual awakening directly on the observer, not on the artwork itself. Consider the courage it took to stand up in a room full of critics and politicians and declare, "The Copernicus of art is here." Malevich saw himself as a cosmic figure, an epical shift in human perception. He wrote in a language that was half poetry, half philosophical madness. He spoke of swimming in the white free abyss, of the new plastic realism. He was not humble, but true revolutionaries rarely are. He believed that art was higher than politics, higher than science, and certainly higher than organized religion. He believed that through the contemplation of pure form, humanity could evolve into a higher state of being, achieving a new, non-objective consciousness. He envisioned entire cities floating in the sky, architecture without weight, a world where the heavy friction of the earth was left behind, transcended. In today's context, Malevich is the patron saint of the glitch, the pixel, and the minimal. Every time you see a sleek minimalist design, you are seeing the ghost of Malevich. Every time you look at the interface of your smartphone, simple geometric shapes on a backlit field, you are looking at a commodified, diluted version of suprematism, but he meant it for the soul, not for the consumer. He wanted to design the architecture of the mind, not the furniture of the living room. He wanted to offer salvation through geometry. The tension in his work is also a profound tension between the static and the dynamic. A square sitting flat on its side is static. It is stable, heavy, ancient. A square tilted on an angle is dynamic. It is moving, it is aggressive, it is modern. Malevich choreographed these tilts with precise intention. He created a sense of velocity without painting a single motion blur. He understood that the human eye perceives diagonal lines as inherently dynamic, implying movement. He built a universe that is in a constant state of expansion and flux. It is an expanding universe theory applied to canvas, a visual representation of cosmic dynamism. We must also acknowledge the intense pedagogical aspect of his life. He was a dedicated teacher. He went to the art school in Vitebsk and famously usurped the position of Marc Chagall, who represented a different, more lyrical strain of Russian modernism. Chagall wanted to paint flying lovers and goats playing violins, rooted in folk traditions and narrative. Malevich wanted to paint the pure, non-objective geometry of the New World. The students, captivated by his radical vision, followed Malevich. They wore black squares sewn onto their sleeves like armbands. They formed a collective called Unovis, the champions of the new art. It was almost a cult, animated by a shared belief in a radical aesthetic future. They believed they were the soldiers of a new aesthetic army, building a utopia with paint. This demonstrates the immense charisma of the man. He could convince young minds that a pure rectangle was more important than a revolution in the streets. There is a coldness to Malevich, yes. It is the coldness of deep space, of absolute scientific precision. But within that coldness, there is a burning heat of conviction. It is the heat of a star. Unlike the emotional heat of the expressionists, which is the heat of the body and the blood, Malevich's heat is the heat of the mind on fire. It is intellectual passion raised to the level of fanaticism. He demands that we leave our sentimental attachments at the door. He asks us to stop loving things and start loving nothing in the conventional sense, to find meaning in pure being. Ultimately, the messianic message of Kazimir Malevich is that the material world is an illusion, a temporary state of affairs that distracts us from the true reality of non-objective feeling. He broke the vessel of art to release the spirit inside. He showed us that you don't need a subject to have a profound meaning. He proved that a simple black shape on a white background could hold more weight, more history, and more power than 1,000 detailed paintings of battles and coronations. When he died in 1935, he had left precise instructions for his funeral. He wanted to be buried in a suprematist coffin, a casket decorated with the black square, the circle, and the cross. Even in death, he refused to return to the old forms. He wanted his final journey to be a flight into the white abyss he had painted all his life. His grave was initially marked with a white cube bearing a black square. It was the final seal on a life dedicated to the absolute. So, when you look at Malevich, do not say, "My child could do that." Your child could draw a square, yes, but your child could not imbue that square with the weight of a dying empire and the hope of a newborn galaxy. Your child could not strip the world of its skin to show the bone structure of the universe. Malevich did not paint a square. He painted the end of everything we knew and the beginning of everything we could become. He painted the door to the fourth dimension and dared us to walk through it. The black square is not an empty image. It is a full stop after the sentence of the past and the capital letter beginning the sentence of the future. It stands there, dark and silent, waiting for us to catch up to its terrifying simplicity. The legacy of suprematism is the legacy of the pure. In a world that is messy, compromised, and gray, Malevich offers the stark, uncompromising clarity of black and white. He offers a visual moral code. He tells us that truth is not found in the accumulation of details, but in the elimination of the unnecessary. He is the great editor of the human experience. Think of the cross paintings, a black cross on white. It is not the cross of the crucifixion. It has no suffering man upon it. It is the intersection of the vertical and the horizontal, the two fundamental forces of construction. It is a secular cross, a cross of power and balance. It reclaims the symbol from the church and gives it back to the universe. It suggests that the intersection of forces is the fundamental reality of life. And consider the silence. If you truly listen to a Malevich painting, you hear nothing. No wind in the trees, no chatter of crowds, no roar of traffic. You hear the vacuum. This silence is his gift. It is a space for the mind to rest, to expand, to be free from the constant bombardment of sensory input. In the early 20th century, this was radical. In the early 21st century, it is essential. We need the white void. We need the place where the scrolling stops, where the notifications cease, and where the mind can simply be. Kazimir Malevich was the man who looked into the abyss and did not blink. He painted what he saw, and what he saw was a terrifying, beautiful, infinite nothingness that contained the potential for everything. He was the Messiah of the Matrix, the prophet of the pixel, and the guardian of the zero. His art remains a challenge, a gauntlet thrown down at the feet of a materialistic world, demanding that we lift our eyes from the mud and look at the geometry of the stars. He assassinated the sun of the old art so that the inner light of the human spirit could finally shine without competition, and in that darkness, illuminated only by the stark geometry of his vision, we find a strange and rigorous kind of freedom.